welcome back to the podcast playground. Our newest podcast is The Best Podcast.
Join Jay Carter and me, Vida Best, on The Best Podcast, where the dynamic duo brings you their insider secrets to everything wonderful. Now, Jay and me dive deep into the top 5 everything, from the latest cell phones to affordable wines that won't break the bank.
So tell a friend, you've found The Best Podcast,
where every recommendation is a gem waiting to be uncovered. Tune in weekly for your dose of excellence.
So think about the last time you ordered a pizza. Just, really picture it.
Oh, I'm sure it was late at night, right?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, whether you're cramming for a big meeting or you're just trying to feed a chaotic family on a Tuesday, or maybe you're just craving a late night slice.
It is the ultimate default meal.
It really is. But I have a question for you. Are you just settling for mediocre pizza because it's convenient? Like, are we all just compromising?
That is a very dangerous question to ask.
I know, but what if I told you that the largest pizza chain in America isn't Domino's?
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah.
No.
It's not Pizza Hut either, and it is certainly not Papa John's.
Wait, really?
Yeah.
Because you see those everywhere.
Right. But if you look at the 2026 locations data, the reigning champion of sheer geographic dominance is actually a brand you might have never even planned to visit.
Let me guess. It's somewhere you just end up by accident.
Exactly. You've probably walked past one a dozen times. It's Hunt Brothers Pizza.
Ah, Hunt Brothers. Yeah, that makes perfect sense.
They command over 10,489 locations across the country.
That is massive.
It's insane. That is almost 3,000 more locations than Domino's. And here's the kicker. 10% of them are concentrated just in Texas.
Which is fascinating because it forces us to completely reevaluate how we define a restaurant chain,
Yeah, how so?
Well, Hunt Brothers basically bypassed traditional commercial real estate entirely. They utilized this business-to-business licensing model. So they partnered directly with convenience stores, gas stations, rural markets.
Oh, so they're not building standalone restaurants.
Exactly. They aren't trying to be a destination dinner spot. They are monetizing the foot traffic of people who are already stopping to buy fuel or, a lottery ticket.
We are going to settle the ultimate pizza debate. We're looking at a massive, incredibly complex dining landscape that's defined by a glaring paradox.
The disconnect between sheer corporate scale and actual culinary quality.
Spot on. We are taking that 2026 Locations Cloud dataset of the largest U.S. chains, and we are slamming it directly into a rigorous, blind, 16-chain taste test ranking.
Oh, the one conducted by the culinary experts at Taste of Home, right?
Yes, exactly. And then, just to figure out what pizza looks like when we remove the corporate constraints entirely, we're pulling in elite industry awards.
Like the 50 top pizza rankings and the infatuation.
Right. We're going to examine America's top 5 premier artisanal pizzerias, too. So we've got the worst chains, the best chains, and the absolute elite restaurants.
What's fascinating here is the collision of those 3 data sets. B2B location footprints, they represent a mastery of supply chain logistics.
Right. It's all about how fast you can move dough and cheese.
Exactly. But then the blind taste tests reveal the compromises required to achieve that logistics mastery. And finally, the artisanal data shows us the absolute upper limits of dough chemistry and thermodynamics when scale is no longer the priority.
So we need to start by looking at those compromises. Let's talk about the chains that failed the Taste of Home blind test. The bottom 5.
Well, ones that really stumbled.
Yeah. The data doesn't just give us a ranking. It gives us a forensic breakdown of why pizza fails when it scales.
It's never just random.
Right. The lowest ranking chains, places like Chuck E. Cheese, Papa John's, Rosati's, Jets, and even the giant Pizza Hut. They fell into very specific operational traps. Let's start with what we could call the environment trap.
Ah, Chuck E. Cheese.
Yeah, Chuck E. Cheese came in dead last. Number 16.
I mean, are we surprised? It relies so heavily on that elementary school birthday nostalgia.
Exactly. But the testers were brutal. They described the crust as this unusual thin cornbread that completely disintegrated when it was subjected to a 20-minute delivery drive.
That cornbread texture is a massive red flag in dough chemistry. And it points directly to their business model.
Because they aren't really in the food business, are they?
All right. Chuck E. Cheese operates on an entertainment-first margin, not a culinary margin. The arcade tokens and the environment drive the revenue.
So the pizza is just an afterthought.
Well, think about it. When you have a Saturday afternoon rush with hundreds of kids running around, you cannot wait 48 hours for a slow, cold fermentation to develop gluten networks and complex yeast esters.
You just don't have the time or the space.
Exactly. You need a rapid-bake, high-yield dough.
Which means they are likely heavily relying on commercial yeast pushed to its absolute limit, right? Like skipping the proofing time that gives a traditional crust its chew and structure.
Precisely. And without proper gluten development, the dough lacks elasticity. When it bakes, it crumbles rather than tearing.
Hence the cornbread comparison.
Yes, and because it lacks a strong internal web of proteins, it has zero structural integrity to withstand the steam environment of a cardboard delivery box.
Oh, wow. Yeah, so it just melts into mush on the drive to your house. That brings us perfectly to the next trap, which I'd call the supply chain trap. And this is perfectly illustrated by Papa John's, which landed at number 14.
Which is wild considering how huge they are.
Right. I mean, we all have that 2 a.m. college nostalgia for Papa John's. They have over 3,200 locations.
But nostalgia doesn't win blind taste tests.
It really doesn't. The testers noted the sauce was overly sweet and lacked spice, but the fatal flaw, the thing that really ranked them low, was the cheese.
The melt was wrong, wasn't it?
Yeah. They noted it separated into these chunky, congealed blocks rather than melting into those long, gooey pulls you expect. It's like pouring sand into a transmission. If you disrupt the mechanics, the whole thing grinds to a halt.
That is an excellent analogy.
In this case, the sand is anti-caking agents, right?
It is. When a company scales to over 3,000 locations, shipping fresh, whole blocks of mozzarella, and asking teenagers to shred it in-house becomes a massive labor and spoilage liability.
So they just cut corner.
They transition to pre-shredded cheese shipped in plastic bags. But to prevent that cheese from fusing back into a solid block during transit, processors coat the shreds in cellulose or various starches.
Wait, cellulose, like wood pulp, basically?
Essentially, yes, plant fiber. And when you heat cellulose in a 500-degree oven, it doesn't melt.
So it just blocks the cheese from doing its job.
It acts as an absolute barrier.
Yeah.
Real high-quality mozzarella stretches because the intact casein protein structures form a continuous fluid network when heated.
Okay, casein proteins, got it.
The fat and moisture are trapped within that network. But when every single shred is coated in an anti-caking starch, those casein proteins cannot physically bond with one another.
Oh, that makes so much sense.
The cheese just sweats out its fat and clumps together. You lose the structural mechanics of the melt entirely just to solve a logistical shipping problem.
So you sacrifice the cardinal rule of pizza, the cheese pull, just to make the truck deliveries easier. That is a brutal compromise.
It really is.
But what happens when the compromise isn't the ingredients, but the actual assembly? Look at Rosati's, coming in at number 13.
What went wrong there?
The testers actually praised their sauce, but the pizza structurally failed because the toppings, specifically the pepperoni, were buried completely underneath the cheese.
Oh, no. That's a disaster.
Right. I'm looking at the physics of this, and it seems like a fundamental misunderstanding of heat transfer. If I want to crisp a piece of meat, I roast it. If I bury it under a blanket of wet berry, I'm steaming it.
That is exactly the thermodynamic failure happening there.
Yeah.
The cheese acts as a highly effective thermal insulator.
Because it's full of moisture.
Right. And pepperoni is essentially a cured sausage with a high fat content. To get those crispy, charred edges that curl up into little cups, the meat requires direct, unimpeded exposure to the ambient radiant heat of the oven.
Which is pushing, what, 500 to 600 degrees Fahrenheit?
Exactly. That intense heat rapidly renders the fat and crisps the protein edges.
But if you hide it under the mozzarella...
the radiant heat never reaches it. The pepperoni is completely insulated.
So what kind of heat is it getting?
Instead, it is subjected only to the conductive heat from the dough and the sauce below it, which is significantly lower. The fat slowly renders out, but it has nowhere to go.
Oh, gross. So it just pools up.
Yes, it gets trapped between the sauce and the cheese, creating a greasy, unappetizing barrier. You're essentially braising or boiling the pepperoni in its own fat and tomato water.
Which totally explains why it feels like an oily sponge.
Okay, so the final trap these massive chains fall into seems to be the equipment trap.
Or stepping out of their zone of genius.
Exactly. We see this with Jets at number 15 and Pizza Hut at number 12. Both massive players. Huge. Jets is a Michigan powerhouse, legendary for their Detroit-style deep dish. And Pizza Hut is the third largest chain in America, built on the back of the classic thick pan pizza.
But they didn't do well in the test. Because for this standardized test, the experts judged their standard hand-tossed or thin crusts, and both failed miserably on texture. Jets was unpleasantly chewy, and Pizza Hut lacked any crispness on the bottom.
This is a classic issue of thermal mass and oven calibration.
Break that down for me.
Sure. A true pan pizza, like the ones that built Pizza Hut's empire, relies on the thermal mass of a heavy steel or cast iron pan.
Right, the iconic black pans they use.
Yes. You oil the pan heavily, drop the dough in, and as it bakes, the pan retains and radiates intense heat directly into the bottom of the dough. You're effectively deep frying the crust in its own pan.
But if you take a standard thin, hand-tossed pizza and try to run it through an oven system calibrated for heavy cast iron pans,
The heat transfer is entirely wrong. Deep dish ovens are often calibrated for longer, slower bakes to ensure the heat penetrates the thick dough and the massive amount of toppings without burning the top.
so it's a low and slow situation.
Relatively speaking, yes.
Huh.
So if you put a thin, hand-tossed dough on a screen and run it through that same slow-bake conveyor, it doesn't get the rapid, aggressive blast of bottom heat required to create a crisp exterior.
It just sits there baking forever.
Exactly. It slowly dehydrates, resulting in that tough, leathery chew that testers complained about with Jets, or the limp blonde bottom they found at Pizza Hut. You cannot easily switch between radically different dough architectures without completely recalibrating your thermal environment.
Which circles us back to the Hunt Brothers phenomenon.
Yes, the thousands of locations.
Here's where it gets really interesting. Is fast food pizza just like a catchy pop song on the radio? I mean, Hunt Brothers, Pizza Hut, Papa John's, they have thousands of locations. Are we just confusing most available with best tasting?
What's fascinating here is that the B2B data and the location footprint represent distribution and logistics. They do not represent culinary excellence.
People are just buying what is directly in front of them.
Exactly. They're buying convenience, not objectively the best pizza.
So if the biggest chains don't always win on taste, what does it take to actually break into the top 5 best pizza chains?
You have to solve those traps we just talked about.
Right. And the chains that actually solve these problems, the Taste of Home top 5 list, proves you can scale without ruining the food. Let's break down how Mod Pizza, Lou Malnati's, Papa Murphy's, Domino's, and California Pizza Kitchen managed to hack the system.
The chains that succeed at scale are the ones that engineer specific operational solutions to those exact logistical traps. They don't just try to force a traditional pizzeria model into 1,000 locations.
They redesign the parameters of the food itself.
Precisely.
Let's start with Mod Pizza, breaking into the top 5 at number 5. They are a fast, casual, build-your-own model.
The assembly line style.
Yeah. The testers loved the thin crust, noting it had a perfect light char and wasn't bogged down by grease. They specifically highlighted this as a personal pie experience, not a family-style sharing pizza.
And there's a serious functional reason for that.
I figured. You can't just take an 11-inch personal dough and scale its exact ratios up to an 18-inch pie, right?
You absolutely cannot. It is a matter of water evaporation and structural integrity. Mod thrives because they optimize their entire operation for rapid, high-heat baking of a small surface area.
Because the pizza is only 10 or 11 inches.
Right. They can press the dough incredibly thin without it tearing when loaded with toppings. That ultra-thin profile allows them to blast it in a highly calibrated oven for just a few minutes.
So the water in the dough evaporates faster, giving you the char.
Exactly. The rapid heat penetration creates immediate oven spring.
Oven spring? What's that?
It's the sudden expansion of steam inside the dough. It gives a crust that light texture, while the exterior chars before the interior dries out into a cracker.
Okay, but if you tried to make that a huge family-sized pizza...
If you tried to stretch that exact same hydration formulation to an 18-inch family size, the center would turn into soup under the weight of the toppings, and the edges would burn before the middle was fully baked.
Wow. So Mod wins because they strictly enforce the boundaries of their product size. They just stay right in their lane.
Yes, they engineered the product for the exact size they sell.
Now moving to number 4, Lou Malnati's. Here is where the data completely surprised me.
Because of the deep dish.
Exactly. Lou Malnati's is world famous for Chicago deep dish, but the testers ordered the thin crust, cut tavern style into squares, and ranked it the 4th best chain pizza in America.
Which is incredible.
They raved about a crust flavor that echoed the deep dish, but without the incredible heft, paired with a remarkably herbaceous sauce. How did they pull that off?
It is a brilliant example of textural translation. When a traditional pizzeria makes a thin crust, they usually aim for a New York-style, pliable, foldable, moderate hydration.
Right, the classic fold.
But Lou Malnati's approaches their thin crust with a distinctly Midwestern philosophy. They likely utilize a dough formulation with a much higher fat content, incorporating butter or specific oils.
Similar to what creates that rich, biscuit-like quality of their deep.
Exactly.
But wait, I would think more fat makes a dough softer, right? And tavern style is famous for snapping, like a cracker.
That is the paradox of fat in baking. Fat coats the flour proteins, which actually inhibits long gluten strands from forming.
Oh, so it stops it from getting chewy?
Yes. This creates what bakers call a short dough. It doesn't have the chewy bread-like pull of a New York slice. It has a delicate, crispy snap.
Oh, I see.
When you roll a short, fat-enriched dough paper thin and bake it, it almost shatters.
Yeah.
And cutting it into a grid, the tavern style, is an act of structural engineering.
Wait, the square cut is functional. I thought it was just a regional quirk.
Oh, it's highly functional. A massive thin slice cut into a triangle will flop under its own weight because the tip has no structural support. A square cut ensures every single piece has rigid geometric integrity.
It's the suspension bridge of pizzas. That is brilliant. Okay, let's talk about number 3 because I really have to push back on this one.
Papa Murphy's.
Yes. Papa Murphy's took the bronze medal. They have over 1,000 locations, but they are a take and bake model.
Which is very unique in this space.
They hand you a raw pizza on a cardboard tray, and you bake it in your own kitchen oven. I'm looking at this and thinking, they are essentially a grocery store deli counter masquerading as a restaurant.
I can see why you'd say that.
They are outsourcing the hardest, most variable part of the cooking process, the actual application of heat to the consumer. Does this even count as chain restaurant takeout?
It is a highly debated classification, I'll give you that. But from a purely logistical standpoint, it is perhaps the most brilliant hack in the entire fast food industry.
A hack.
Yes. If we connect this to the fundamental problem of takeout, we have to recognize the single greatest enemy of pizza.
The cardboard delivery box. The steam room effect.
Exactly. The moment a pizza leaves a 500-degree oven and goes into a corrugated cardboard box, the degradation begins.
It's basically dying on the drive over.
The ambient moisture from the steaming tomato sauce and the cooling cheese is trapped. It condensates on the inside of the lid and rains back down onto the pizza.
Yeah, the soggy bottom.
Right. Within 5 minutes, the crispy bottom you carefully engineered in the oven is destroyed. The starches in the crust absorb the water and become soggy and chewy. Papa Murphy's looked at that insurmountable physical problem and simply refused to play the game.
So by making me turn on my oven, preheat it to 425, and bake it myself, they aren't just saving on labor costs.
No, they are ensuring you get to experience the pizza at its absolute thermodynamic peak.
Which is right when it comes out.
Exactly. The absolute peak moment of a pizza's lifespan is the 60 seconds after it emerges from the heat. The cheese is actively bubbling, the rendered oils are reabsorbing into the crust, and the exterior has maximum rigidity.
So by forcing me to bake it, Papa Murphy's guarantees that I experience that 60-second window in my own kitchen.
Right. Completely bypassing the delivery box steam room. It is a massive exchange of your personal labor for guaranteed quality control.
Wow. I suppose I can't argue with the results if it lands them at number 3. But let's look at a chain that solved the delivery problem without making me do the dishes.
The number 2 spot.
Yes. Coming in at number 2, Domino's. This is the shocker of the beta set for me.
It really is an anomaly.
Domino's is the only brand that is both a massive corporate behemoth, over 7,200 locations, the second largest chain in America, and a top-tier taste winner. How do they pull off what Pizza Hut and Papa John's failed to do?
Domino's achieved this through what is widely considered one of the greatest corporate turnarounds in modern food history.
Right. They famously admitted their pizza tasted like cardboard a few years ago.
They did. And they fixed it through an almost ruthless focus on food science and standardization. They didn't just tweak their recipe. They re-engineered the anatomy of their pizza.
Well, the testers raved about their sauce and the creamy mozzarella, but the absolute secret weapon they highlighted was the crust edge.
La cornizione.
Yeah. They pointed out that it was brushed with an oil and herb blend, heavily leaning into Italian seasoning, garlic, and butter flavors. They essentially said that finishing a slice of Domino's gives you a bonus breadstick at the end.
Which is a masterstroke of behavioral design.
How so?
For decades, the outer crust of delivery pizza was considered the discard pile. It was dry, flavorless, and purely functional as a handle to hold the slice.
Yeah, you just throw the bones back in the box.
Exactly. But by treating the crust as a separate culinary entity and applying an intensely flavored fat-based coating post-bake, Domino's incentivized the consumer to consume the entire product.
And it masks any dryness from the delivery process, doesn't it?
Precisely. The oil coating provides a burst of moisture and flavor that counteracts the inevitable staling that occurs during a 20-minute delivery drive.
That's so smart.
Furthermore, Domino's mastery of their supply chain is unparalleled. They utilize highly calibrated impingement ovens.
Impingement ovens? What's the difference between that and a regular oven?
These ovens blast concentrated jets of hot air directly at the pizza as it moves along a conveyor.
Wait, so it's like a massive air fryer?
Essentially, yes. It strips away the cold halo of air surrounding the raw dough and forces heat into the center faster than traditional radiant heat. This guarantees that a pepperoni pizza in Seattle has the exact same crispness and bake time as one in Miami, regardless of the local ambient humidity or the skill level of the teenager running the kitchen.
That is wild. The impingement oven acts like a massive air fryer for thousands of pizzas a day. But even with all that tech, they are still only number 2.
The crown goes elsewhere.
The undisputed champion of the Taste of Home rankings, the #1 best pizza chain in America, is California Pizza Kitchen.
Which operates in an entirely different commercial stratosphere.
It really does. CPK is famous for their wild gourmet inventions. You know, the BBQ chicken pizza, the Thai chicken pizza.
Very California.
Right. But the testers strictly ordered the basic pepperoni. They expected it to be boring. Instead, they were blown away.
They praised the rusticity of it.
Yeah, they praised the rustic, spicy meat, the perfectly balanced cheese-to-crust proportions, and an incredibly complex garlic-infused sauce. But the deciding factor was the crust, which they noted was baked in an actual wood-fired oven.
The differentiator.
I mean, putting a live firewood oven in a suburban shopping mall feels like an absolute nightmare for commercial real estate. Why go through that trouble?
Because you cannot fake the thermodynamics of a wood fire. If Domino's solves scale through impingement tech, and Papa Murphy solved it by outsourcing the bake, CTK solved it by dragging artisanal high-heat equipment into the mass market.
Wood-fired ovens operate much hotter, right?
Significantly higher than standard commercial gas ovens, often pushing 700 to 800 degrees Fahrenheit.
Which changes everything about how the dough reacts.
Completely. That intense multi-directional heat conduction from the stone floor, convection from the swirling hot air, and intense radiant heat from the live flame causes an explosive oven spring.
There's that term again.
Yes. The water in the dough vaporizes instantly, creating massive airy pockets in the crust. Simultaneously, the extreme surface heat caramelizes the complex sugars in the tomato sauce in seconds and blasts the edges of the pepperoni until they are deeply charred.
You simply cannot replicate that aggressive, chaotic heat transfer in a tightly controlled 450-degree conveyor oven.
You can't. CPK provides an upscale, artisanal heat profile within a corporate chain environment.
But at the end of the day, even a massive, beautiful, mall-based, wood-fired oven is just simulating what the true obsessive artisans do on a daily basis.
Correct. They are scaling the idea of artisanal pizza, but there's an absolute ceiling to what you can achieve when you have to ensure consistency across hundreds of locations.
Which means we need to leave the chains behind entirely. We need to look at what happens when that ceiling is removed. Let's move into section 3, the apex of the art.
This is where it gets really fun.
We are looking at America's 5 premier pizza restaurants based on elite industry awards. And we're going to see that at this level, pizza stops being a logistical utility and becomes an obsession with chemistry.
The transition from commodity to high culinary art. Notice how distinct the regional styles become here, and how the technical execution borders on fanaticism.
First up, sitting in New York City on the Lower East Side, Una Pizza Napoletana. This is Chef Anthony Mangieri's domain.
It dominates the 50 top pizza awards globally.
And what strikes me is the incredible restriction. It is exclusively naturally leavened, wood-fired Neapolitan pies. They aren't trying to do everything. They are doing one extremely specific, historically rigid thing.
Mangieri is a purist in the truest sense. Neapolitan pizza is not just a style. It is a codified historical tradition from Naples. The rules dictate high hydration dough and, crucially, zero commercial yeast.
Zero. So how does it rise?
Una relies entirely on a natural wild yeast starter, or a levain.
So no rapid bake, 2-hour proofing like Chuck E. Cheese.
The exact opposite. Wild yeast requires a long, slow fermentation, often spanning multiple days. During this time, the ambient bacteria in the starter break down the complex starches in the flour into simple sugars.
Okay.
But more importantly, they produce lactic and acetic acids. This is what gives authentic Neapolitan dough its profound, complex flavor profile, a slight tang that you can never achieve with commercial baker's yeast.
So it's almost like a sourdough.
Very similar microbiology. And when that highly fermented dough hits a 900-degree wood-fired oven, the bake time is violently fast. 60 to 90 seconds, absolute maximum.
90 seconds to cook an entire pizza.
Yes. And the result is a texture that is totally alien to the American fast food palate. It's incredibly soft, designed to be folded into a portfolio or wallet.
Wait, it's soft, not crispy.
Right. The center is slightly soupy from the moisture of fresh, raw buffalo mozzarella and San Marzano tomatoes. And the crust is rimmed with wild, erratic, blistering, what they call leopard spotting.
It is an exercise in historical preservation through microbiology.
Beautifully said.
Okay, keeping it in New York, our second premier spot takes a very different approach. Milda Street Pizzeria, ranked #1 by The Infatuation.
Ah, yes.
They operate out of Brooklyn in the West Village. And this place fascinates me because it's a hybrid. They take the architecture of a classic, sturdy, foldable NYC slice, the kind you expect from a corner joint, but they treat the toppings like a Michelin-starred composed dish.
They really push the boundaries.
They are famous for adding things like cold, fresh burrata cheese and sweet fig jam to the pizza after it comes out of the oven. I have to be honest, putting cold cheese and fruit jam on a hot slice of pepperoni pizza sounds like culinary chaos. Why does that work?
It works because they understand the neurobiology of flavor receptors.
The neurobiology.
Yes. The traditional New York slice is a masterpiece of utility. It's baked at around 550 degrees in a gas deck oven, creating a dense, highly structured crust that can support weight without collapsing. L'industrie respects that utilitarian foundation, but they elevate it through contrast.
Temperature and texture contrast.
Exactly. When you take a hot, heavily savory, salty foundation, like a crispy dough, with cured meats and rich tomato sauce, and introduce a dollop of cold, rich, creamy burrata post-bake, you trigger multiple sensory receptors simultaneously.
Oh, so your brain is just lighting up?
The cold cream cuts through the aggressive heat and rendered fat of the slice. The sweet fig jam provides a massive counterpunch to the high sodium content of the cured meats. It's the same culinary principle as pairing melon with prosciutto.
You are turning a monolithic, heavy slice into a dynamic, multi-layered tasting menu on a single piece of dough. They are literally hacking our palate.
That's exactly what it is.
Moving to the Midwest, our third premier pizzeria is in Chicago. Pequod's Pizzeria, crowned #1 by Yelp elites.
The legendary spot.
Now, we talked about Lou Malnati's deep dish earlier, but Pequod's does a pan pizza that is famous for something completely different, the caramelized edge. If you look at a photo of a Pequod's pizza, the entire crust is surrounded by this dark, almost black, rigid crown. It looks completely burnt.
It looks burnt to an untrained eye, but it is actually one of the most masterful, deliberate applications of the Maillard reaction in the entire pizza industry.
Break that down, because caramelization and the Maillard reaction are actually two different chemical processes, right?
Yes, and Pequod's technically utilizes both. What they do is take a heavy cast iron pan and press the dough in, but they leave a deliberate gap around the edges.
A gap. Why?
Because then they take a massive amount of cheese, typically a blend of moisture-rich mozzarella and high-fat brick cheese, and spread it all the way to the very perimeter. So it makes direct contact with the bare, heavily oiled iron sides of the pan.
So the cheese is literally frying against the metal.
Exactly. As the heavy pan heats up in the oven, that perimeter cheese melts down between the dough and the iron. The proteins and amino acids in the dairy react with the lactose sugars under high heat. That is the Maillard reaction.
Oh, wow.
It turns deeply brown, nutty, and profoundly savory. Simultaneously, the sheer heat of the iron causes the natural sugars to caramelize. You end up with a rigid, crispy, lacy crown of toasted cheese that completely surrounds the pizza.
It provides this intense, bitter, savory crunch that perfectly balances the massive sweet acidity of the heavy tomato sauce in the center. It's highly controlled culinary science.
It is brilliant engineering.
Heading out west to San Francisco for our fourth spot, we have Tony's Pizza Napoletana. This is the flagship for Chef Tony Gemignani, a multi-time world pizza champion.
He is a legend in the industry.
And this place boggles my mind. At Una, we saw a chef dedicate his life to one single style. At Tony's, he does everything. He serves authentic Neapolitan, classic New York, Detroit pan, and coal-fired all under one roof.
It's unheard of.
Logistically, managing the thermodynamics for all those styles simultaneously seems impossible. How does the kitchen not collapse into chaos?
It is an absolute engineering marvel.
Mm.
To execute those distinct regional styles at a world-class level requires vastly different thermal environments. Tony's Pizza Napoletana literally operates multiple, completely different types of ovens on the same line.
Because you can't cook a New York slice in a Neapolitan wood-fire oven.
It would incinerate. A Neapolitan requires a 900-degree wood-fired dome that utilizes intense radiant heat from a live flame. A classic New York slice requires a 550-degree gas deck oven, which relies on conductive heat from a stone floor to slowly crisp the heavy dough.
And the coal-fired.
A coal-fired pizza requires the dry, intense ambient heat of anthracite coal burning at 800 degrees to achieve that specific cracker-like char without the moisture of burning wood.
So he's managing all of these at once.
Yes. To maintain those distinct thermodynamic profiles simultaneously, calibrating the dough hydrations to match the specific moisture loss of each unique oven, it is like conducting a symphony of fire. He has built a living museum of pizza physics.
A museum of pizza physics. I love that. And finally, rounding out the top 5, we head to Los Angeles for a place that might be pushing the physics further than anyone else. Pizzerias.
A fascinating concept.
This spot is pioneering Tokyo-style Neapolitan pizza in America. They are applying strict Japanese precision to Italian food. The experts describe the crust as impossibly airy, shattering delicately when you bite it rather than having a heavy chew. What is happening in the dough to cause that?
This is where we see the absolute upper limits of hydration science.
Yeah.
Tokyo-style Neapolitan is rooted in the Japanese philosophy of shokunin, which is the endless, microscopic pursuit of perfection in a single craft.
Okay.
The Japanese pizzolos traveled to Naples, learned the strict traditional rules, and then decided to push the physical variables as far as scientifically possible.
And the primary variable they push is water, right?
Yes. They push the hydration level of the dough to extreme limits, sometimes 75 or 80% water to flour weight.
Wait, 80% water? That sounds like a puddle.
Dough at that hydration level is practically a liquid. It is incredibly sticky and almost unworkable to a standard chef. It requires meticulous, highly disciplined handling and exact temperature control during fermentation, so the gluten network doesn't collapse under the weight of the water.
But when that waterlogged dough hits the massive heat of the oven...
It acts like a bomb.
Wow.
The immense amount of water trapped inside the delicate gluten web instantly turns to steam. The steam expands violently, inflating the crust to massive proportions.
But because there was so much water, what happens to the texture?
Well, the heat bakes the incredibly thin walls of those air pockets incredibly fast without turning them dense. The result is a crust that looks massive and heavy, but is actually mostly hot air.
When you bite into it, it shatters like a delicate pastry rather than pulling like bread. It is an elevation of texture through extreme technical discipline.
Yep.
Okay, I have to step back and look at the whole board here. We've gone from Hunt Brothers in a gas station to Pizzerias making extreme hydration, shattering crusts. Can we even categorize these things together anymore?
This raises an important question.
Yeah. Are we reaching a point where comparing a massive chain pizza to a Tokyo-style Neapolitan pie is just fundamentally absurd? I mean, they are technically both dough, sauce, and cheese, but they serve entirely different human needs.
They really do.
If I'm feeding a dozen teenagers after a soccer game, I'm not ordering 80% hydration Japanese pizza, I'm ordering 4 large Dominoes.
You are identifying the great divergence in modern American food culture. We are witnessing 2 entirely distinct parallel tracks of evolution that have stopped competing with one another.
Explain that.
On one track, pizza has evolved into pure, hyper-efficient utility. The ability for a corporation like Domino's or Hunt Brothers to utilize global supply chains, anti-caking cheese agents, and intelligent ovens to deliver hot, highly consistent, affordable calories to millions of people on demand is a triumph of logistics.
It's food as a product.
Right. It is designed to fulfill the need for immediate fuel, convenience, and comfort. It is an engineering marvel.
And the other track?
The other track is pizza as a canvas for high culinary art and obsessive chemistry. Places like Pizza Napoletana, Tony's, and Pizzerias are entirely unconcerned with convenience or scale.
They don't care if you're in a rush.
Exactly. They are optimizing for transcendent sensory experiences. They are using wild yeast microbiology, precise thermal dynamics, and flavor receptor hacking to push the boundaries of what flour and water can do.
So comparing them is pointless.
Comparing the two tracks is unfair to both, because they measure success by completely different metrics. One optimizes for ubiquitous availability, the other optimizes for the absolute boundaries of texture and flavor.
That brings this entire deep dive into the source material full circle perfectly.
It really does.
We started by looking at the largest chains in America and saw that sheer corporate footprint often demands devastating compromises, sacrificing the structural integrity of dough for rapid baking, or ruining the melt of cheese with cellulose just to make shipping easier.
The inescapable friction of scale.
Then we looked at the chains that fought back. We saw Mod Pizza optimize the personal pie to maintain high heat char. We saw Papa Murphy's completely bypass the delivery box steam room by making us use our own ovens.
And CPK conquering them all with a wood fire oven.
Exactly. They proved you can scale if you're willing to engineer brilliant solutions to those compromises.
They elevated the baseline of what fast food can be.
And finally, we stared at the apex of the craft. We saw chefs manipulating lactic acids, controlling the Maillard reaction against cast iron, managing 4 different thermodynamic oven environments simultaneously, and pushing water hydration to its absolute physical breaking point.
It's an incredible spectrum.
So, to you, the listener, the next time you find yourself staring down a frantic Tuesday night dinner or looking for a late-night slice, you now possess the blueprint of the entire industry.
You really do.
You understand the profound difference between a dough engineered for a 20-minute delivery drive and a naturally leavened dough meant to be eaten seconds out of a 900-degree fire. You know exactly what you are paying for, whether it's the logistical miracle of convenience or the fanatical obsession of a master chef.
You are armed with the deep science and the business strategy to make a truly informed choice.
But before we sign off, I want to leave you with a lingering thought about the future of this landscape. As techniques from the artisanal track-like high hydration doughs, natural fermentation, and hot and cold topping contrasts become heavily publicized and desired by the general public, what happens to the massive chains caught in the middle?
It's a great question.
Will the corporate behemoths eventually be forced to radically overhaul their supply chains and adopt these complex artisanal techniques just to survive an increasingly educated consumer base? Or will that gap between the utilitarian fast food pizza and the elevated artisanal pizza simply become so incredibly wide that we eventually stop using the word pizza to describe both of them entirely?
That is the multi-billion-dollar question facing the industry over the next decade.
It truly is. We hope the next time you grab a slice, it tastes just a little bit more fascinating knowing the physics, the chemistry, and the strategy hiding inside the crust. See you next time.